Page 415 continued. American literature in the 20th century. World events and upheavals such as the two world wars, the spread of communism, the fall of fascism, and nationalized and local events such as rapid industrialization and urbanization, the Great Dust Bowl disaster to Midwest agriculture, the Prohibition experiment of the 20th and the Great Depression of the 30s left their mark on the social, cultural, and literary life of America. The inventions of science as the advent of the radio, the automobile, the moving picture theaters, the television, and the electrification of rural America ushered into an era of scientific and technological advancement and further research which changed the national thinking, social life, and cultural and literary values. Further, the writers, thinkers, and the reading public were influenced by interest in psychology, especially the works of Freud and Jung, quote, the sociological studies of environmental influences upon the development of personality, and the concept of causality developed in the physical sciences, Naturalism was fostered by Stephen Gane, Gane, Frank Norris, Norris, Jack London, and Theodore Dreiser, Dreiser, in the previous century. It dominated the American literary scene for about 30 years of the 20th century. Quote, as a literary method, it attempted scientific objectivity in the treatment of the natural man, and emphasized the overpowering aspects of his environment or his passions and instincts, unquote, stop. French literature, especially the works of Zola, influenced naturalism in American literature. The naturalistic writers were inclined toward determinism in viewing man. Hence, they questioned the conception of free will. For half a century or more, naturalism was a focal point in American literature. Humanism was also a marked characteristic of American literature of this period. Many humanitarian social programs for improving the lot of man, especially the miserable condition of labor, were initiated. Many organizations as American Federation of Labor 1886 and the Revolutionary Industrial Workers of the World 1905 were formed to espouse the interest of the working classes. Thus, the humanitarian and social concerns influenced the thinking mind. Literature dealing with these concerns and voicing passionate protest against human exploitation came into existence. Harvard University immensely influenced American literature of this period. William James, George Santayana, Josiah Royce, George Herbert Palmer, the great philosophers in the Department of Philosophy, were not all writers of literature, but they also evinced keen interest in standards of literary criticism. Writers from the departments of literature provided prospective writers both inspiration and instructions. Harvard University also took a lead in Oriental studies. Irving Babbitt, Babbitt, and Paul Elmore Moore pursued the study of Sanskrit and Oriental literatures at Harvard University. They also developed the critical and philosophical views and became the pioneers of new humanism. Fiction. The first decade of the 20th century was dominated by poetry and drama. The novel showed signs and emergence during the 20th of the last century. 20, it should be printing mistake. The novel showed signs and emergence during the 20s of the last century. The rise of the novel coincides with by the flowering of realism in the 19th century. Socialistic impulses began to appear in the novels of this period. The mild realism of Howells gave place to the sterner naturalism of Stephen Gain, Frank Morris, Jack London, and Theodore Drezier. Drezier, page 416, a naturalist after the manner of Zola, quote, was an objective realist who gathered his facts impersonally, unquote, stop. His famous novels are Sister Carrie, Carrie, 1900, Jenny Gerhardt, Gerhart, Titty, 1911, The Financier, 1912, The Titan, 1914, The Genius, 1915, and An American Tragedy, 1925. Commenting on his contribution to American fiction, The Literary History of the United States remarks, quote, in Drezier, the subject matter is always more important than the expression. Because he reveals the nerves of American society, he has exerted a more profound, a more lasting influence than any other novelist on 20th century realistic fiction in America, stop, unquote. Edith Wharton, who was influenced by Henry James, wrote many realistic novels. Her famous works are The Valley of Decision, 1902, The House of Mirth, 1905, Ethan Frome, Frome, 1911, which is often called her masterpiece of New England tragic realism, and The Age of Innocence, 1920, which presents a realistic picture of decadent New York society. Ellen Glasgow, another woman novelist, is, quote, essentially a novelist of social history, unquote, stop. She, in fact, wrote a social history of Virginia in her readable novels. The Battleground, 1902, Barren Ground, 1925, The Romantic Comedians, 1926, and Vein, Vein of Iron, 1935. Para. Willa, Willa Cather, Cather, was the most consistent woman novelist working through the war decades. She was influenced by Flaubert, Flaubert. She discarded the plot and gave importance to subject matter. Her famous novels are MacClears, capital M small c, capital C small Lure apostrophe S, 1912, O Pioneers, 1913, The Song of the Lark, 1915, My Antonia, 1918, Youth and Bright Medusac, 1920, a collection of short stories, A Lost Lady, 1923, Death Comes for the Archbishop, 1927, her masterpiece, and Shadows as the Rock, 1931. Para. Dorothy Cornfield Fisher is also a realistic novelist of this period. She is remembered for The Bent Twig, 1915, and The Deepening Stream, 1930. Stop. Para. James Branch Cabell, Cabell, quote, a link between past and future in American literature, unquote, was a romanticist who was endowed with a gift for satire. He exposed American complacency and hypocrisy in his novels, Figures of Earth, 1921, Something About Eve, 1927, and his masterpiece, Jurgen, Jurgen, 1919. His symbols are mainly sexual and moralistic. Para. Sherwood Anderson, 1876 to 1941, a great name associated with Chicago Renaissance, expressed the inner turmoil in man with great sensitivity and expressed great sympathy for the individual caught in a machine age. His famous novels are Windy Macpherson's Son, 1916, Marching Men, 1917, and Many Marriages, 1923. He dealt with familiar people in a familiar way, but his prose is stylized. Short story became a powerful medium of literary expression in his hands. His collection of short stories are Winsberg, Chio, Chio, 1919, The Triumph of Egg, 1921, and Houses of Men, 1923. Para. Sinclair Lewis, 1885 to 1951, imparted a new significance to American novel. He was probably the dominant figure in America in the 20s of the last century. He belonged to a period of national self-scrutiny. As a novelist, his aim was to cure social evils through ridicule and satire. His main works are Main Street, 1920, Babbitt, 1922, Arrowsmith, the first novel of science, Elmer Gantry and Dodsworth, 1929. His novels present a vivid panorama of American life and civilization of his time. He could be very well called the conscience of his country. Sinclair Lewis was the first American writer to receive the Nobel Prize for Literature. His King's Blood Royal, 1947, deals with the Negro theme, the most sensational theme in America. Para. William Faulkner, 1897 to 1972, is one of the most outstanding novelists of the 20th century. Born in Mississippi, he was rooted deep in the tradition and mores of Plantation South. This region, which Faulkner called Yoknapatawapha country, Yoknapatawapha, serves as the scene of his novels. It is both an actual and mythical region. He became a friend of Sherwood Anderson, who influenced his literary development. Commenting on Faulkner's fictional art, Egbert S. Oliver remarks, quote, Faulkner wrote about his own land, his own people, his own culture, with insight and intensity, probing the evil in man's nature and the tragedy that results from that evil. He, like Hawthorne, illuminates the depth of human soul, probing the dark places, working intensively into the nature of man. He brings to his fictional insight a fine perception of the corrosive quality of an unrecognized sense of guilt and shame. Unquote, stop. In his novels and short stories, he has laid bare the, quote, human heart in conflict with itself, unquote, stop. His famous works are Sartori's, 1929, The Sound and the Fury, 1929, As Lay Dying, 1930, Sanctuary, 1931, Light in August, 1932, Absalom, 1936, and The Unvanquished. A Fable, 1954, is based on the background of war. Faulkner's style is, page 417, theoretical, ornamental, and labyrinthine. In 1950, Faulkner won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Para. Ernest Ernest Hemingway, Hemingway, 1898 to 1961, quote, the bronze god of the whole contemporary literary experience in America, changed the course of storytelling and gave a new cadence to the language than has the work of any of his contemporaries, unquote, stop. He was the son of a doctor at Oak Park, Illinois. He joined journalism in the beginning and then entered the military service during First World War. He was severely wounded on the Italian front and decorated for valor. He again joined journalism and reported on the Greco-Turkish War in 1920. He also worked as correspondent in Paris, where he became an active member of the artistic circle around Gertrude Skein, Skein, and many American writers, Scott Fitzgerald and Sherwood Anderson. Para. 2 volumes of his short stories, In Our Times 1924 and Men Without Women 1927, and his first novel, The Sun Also Rises 1926, established Hemingway as an outstanding writer. War and violence are predominant in his 2 war novels, A Farewell to Arms 1929 and For Whom the Bell Tolls 1940. Arms is based on his personal experience of war on the Italian front. It is the story of Lieutenant Frederick Henry's withdrawal from the war into love with Catherine Barclay, an English nurse who dies at childbirth. For Whom the Bell Tolls is a Spanish Civil War story in which Robert Jordan, the hero, dies for a lost cause. All his tragic heroes are losers. The Sun Also Rises 1926 is a novel about the lost generation. The Old Man and the Sea 1952 narrates the sea adventures of Cuban fisherman Santiago. He is a typical Hemingway hero who does not accept defeat. Quote, a man can be destroyed but not defeated, stop, unquote. Death in Afternoon 1932 and Green Hills of Africa 1935 are concerned with bullfighting and big game hunting. His other novels are To Have and Have Not 1937, Across the River and Into the Trees 1950, and Islands in the Stream. A Movable Feast was posthumously published in 1964. It is an account of his early Paris days. Top para. Hemingway was a gifted craftsman. His style reflects his personality. A critic comments, quote, here the style is distinctly the man, semicolon, hard, clean, close-clipped, persistently masculine, colon. His very adjectives are appropriately, even aggressively athletic and accurate, stop, unquote. His words are carefully chosen, quote, they live and shine, each in its place, stop. Every sentence that he wrote is so finished and perfect that one cannot think of its being improved, stop. His symbols are concrete, not abstract, unquote. Para. Hemingway, along with William Faulkner, Scott Fitzgerald, John Dos Passos, and Sinclair Lewis belongs to the, quote, lost generation, unquote, a term which was coined by Gertrude Stein. Hemingway is the most complete representative of, quote, the lost generation, unquote, because he has articulated in his novels the precise feelings, longings, and frustrations of the lost generation. Hemingway was awarded Nobel Prize for Literature in 1954. Para. F. Scott Fitzgerald, 1896 to 1940, was a stern moralist with a tragic vision. He once remarked, quote, all the stories that came into my head had a touch of disaster in them, stop, unquote. His first novel, The Side of Paradise, 1920, is a novel about, quote, the jazz age cynicism, unquote, stop. The Beautiful and the Damned deals with disaster that feels life. His masterpiece, The Great Gatsby, 1925, recaptures the wave of dissolution which swept over the 20s. His short stories, The Tales of the Jazz Age, 1922, achieved both popularity and excellence. Para. John Dos Passos, Passos, quote, the embodiment of the rational artist, unquote, was the conscious, moral, and progressive critic of American manners and habits. His famous first novel, Manhattan Transfer, 1925, is about crosstown New York life. In it, we notice, quote, the early forms of those technical devices that would distinguish the later trilogy, the use of popular songs of newspaper, I repeat. In it, we notice, quote, the early forms of those technical devices that would distinguish the later trilogy, the use of popular songs, of newspaper headlines, of the speech of the people as against the speech of scholars, and of the actual figures from Woodrow Wilson to King C. Gillett, all these sociological indices which are fused into the panoramic view of our city culture, and in USA itself our national culture, unquote, stop. It was followed by the trilogy called USA, which consists of the 42nd parallel 1930-1919 within bracket 1932 and the Big Money 1936. The trilogy gives a picture of American life from 1900 to 1930. Para. Thornton Wilder's The Bridge of San Luis, Sanluis, Ray, R-E-Y, 1927, Heaven's My Destination, 1935, Our Town, 1938, and The Skin of Our Teeth, 1942, and Thomas Wolfe's Look Homeward Angel, 1929, Of Time and River, 1935, The Web and the Rock, 1939, and You Can't Go Home Again, 1940, are memorable works of this period. John Steinbeck wrote Tortilla Flat, 1935, In Dubious Battle, 1936, Of Nice and Men, 1937, The Grapes of Wrath, 1939, The Pearl, 1947, East of Eden, 1952, and Travels with Charlie, 1962. Stop. Page 418. The Grapes of Wrath, W-R-A-T-H, is his masterpiece, which is a realistic study of the dispossessed, the people of the road. Steinbeck was awarded Nobel Prize for Literature in 1962. Pearlis Buck scorned into popularity with the publication of her first novel, The Good Art, in 1931. It is in epistolary form. Her other novels are The Patriot and Gone with the Wind. She enjoyed international fame and popularity. She is considered a link between, quote, the Yankee and the Chinese, due to her Yankee and the Chinese, stop, unquote, should be there, no unquote mark. Due to her deep interest in China and Chinese life, she has been immensely popular in China. She was a popular writer in Denmark from 1932 to 39. She was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. Para. John Updike contributed poems, essays, and stories, both humorous and serious, to The New Yorker. He is considered to be, quote, the most gifted writer of his generation, unquote, stop. He wrote The Poorhouse Fair, 1959, Rabbit, Run, 1960, The Centaur, 1963, and Rabbit Redux, 1971. Quote, Updike, unquote, according to Josephine Hendin, quote, is the first fine writer since D.H. Lawrence to define maleness, M-A-L-E-N-E-S, as sexual and economic responsibility for women, and to connect the decline of society with the decline of masculinity, stop, unquote. His novels use, quote, marriage as the index of social cohesiveness, of economic, political and sexual change, unquote, stop, para. Saul Bellow, a major novelist, commingled realism and imagination in his novels. Quote, his central concerns were money and love, semicolon. Freedom as the interplay between what is given and what is made in the life of man, and love as the interplay between man's identity and its interplay in others, unquote, stop. Some of his famous works are The Dangling Man, 1944, The Victim, 1947, The Adventures of Avgie March, 1953, Henderson the Rain King, 1958, Seize the Day, 1956, Herzog and Mr. Samler's Planet, stop. Bellow's style is unrhetorical, remarkable for its immediacy and color. Para. J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Eye and other works are ironical and full of pathos, which comes from his belief in innocence and doom. His short stories like A Perfect Day for Banana Fish suggest, quote, innocence and breakability, unquote, stop. Para. Erskine, E-R-S-K-I-N-E, Caldwell, C-A-L-D-W-E-L-L, based his novels on the poverty and illiteracy of the Southern poor white. His famous novels Tobacco Road, 1932, and God's Little Acre, 1933, employed the device of using folk humor and the ludicrous in character and incident to expose the social failures faced in the Southern hills. He did remarkable work in the short story. His short stories were collected in many volumes. American Art, 1931, We Are the Living, 1933, and Kneel, K-N-E-E-L, to the Rising Sun, 1935. Para. John Steinbeck, in his famous novels Tortilla Flat, 1935, and In Dubious Battle, 1936, writes about the common man with sympathy and compassion. Humor and anger are found in his novels. Of Nice and Men, 1937, is symbolic, but it has realistic details and objective picture of genuine conditions. He is The Grapes of Wrath, 1939, the Pulitzer Prize novel and a national sensation, deals with, quote, the plight of helpless individual, bracket, or family, bracket closed, caught up in a great social movement, grinding the individuality and spirit to impotency, stop, unquote, para. The post-Second World War writers are concerned with the search of the alienated individual for an identity, for a meaning. Jack Kerouac's novel On the Road, 1957, is a representative work of the Beat generation, B-E-A-T. Kerouac claimed that the, quote, origin of the word, single quote, beat, B-E-A-T, single quote, unquote, as a designation for the movement, and he said that the word derives from Beatitudes, the sayings of the Sermon on the Mount in the 5th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, semicolon. But the word has carried in the popular mind an entirely different suggestion, stop. The work of Kerouac, Ginsberg, and their associates has protested against what they describe as the emptiness of conventional society by the substitution of the unsubstantial, until the unconventional has become for them the required form, ... unquote. Para. Norman Mailer, M-A-I-L-E-R, a rebel writer, wanted to take a political stance in his novels. The Naked and the Dead 1948, The Deer Park 1958, and An American Dream 1965. He, in the words of Josephine Hendin, quote, has explored power as political fact, as sexual energy, as narcissistic, narcissistic joy, unquote, stop. Her novels are products of ambition and frustration. Mailer's The Naked and the Dead is a famous war novel which presents a terrifying view of what war does to man. Truman Capote's Capote's vision is pessimistic. He sees everyone caught between one kind of death or another in cold blood. Other Voices, Other Room 1948, The Grass Harp and Breakfast at Tiffany's. Stop. His collection of short stories, A Tree of Night 1949, included both human horror. James Purdy's Malcolm 1959 and The Nephew 1960 are allegories of both innocence and experience centered respectively on youth and age. His two collections of short stories, The Color of Darkness 1957 and Children is All are memorable. Bernard Malmud, page 419. Bernard Malmud, MALMUD, revealed, quote, a tough, sardonic, and compassionate vision, unquote, in The Natural 1952, The Assistant 1957, A New Life 1961, and in his short stories collected in the volume The Magic Barrel, BARREL, 1958, stop. Catherine Annie Porter published short stories and novelettes. Pale Horse, quote, Pale Rider 1939, and her first novel, Sheep of Fools, appeared in 1962. No unquote mark. In the Heart is a Lonely Hunter, 1940. The Member of the Wedding, 1946. The Ballad of the Sad Cafe, 1951, and Clock Without Hands, 1964, are brief, beautifully written short novels which express sympathy for misfits in society. This was also dealt in Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. James Agee's AGEE', A Death in the Family, presents a Southern family in the presence of death. Robert Penn Warren, a poet and critic, was also a celebrated novelist. His famous novels are All the King's Men, 1946, World Enough and Time, 1950, Band of Angels, 1955, and The Cave, 1959. Egbert S. Oliver writes, quote, Warren, in his serious quest for the nature of the self, represents the more thoughtful currents of the novel in recent American literature. Warren recognizes that the self is in society, that society is based on moral value, that search for understanding is part of man's nature, an integral part of the self, unquote, stop, Kurt, K-U-R-T, Vonnegut, Vonnegut, in his novels Breakfast of Champions, Cat's Cradle, and Slaughterhouse 5, quote, speaks out in his anarchic, disintegrative fiction for our incapacities and against the code of performance, achievement and endurance, unquote, stop. Robert A. Heinlein's Heinlein'' novel, Stranger in a Strange Land, 1961, is about every man's estrangement from pleasure. He finds pleasure in sex, which is the means of gaining power over your own capacities for pleasure. Arthur Clarke, Clarke, in Childhood's End, is concerned with the effacement of I, which is the cause of discontent. Para. William Burroughs in his novels Wild Boys, Naked Lunch, Soft Machine and Ticket that Exploded Angrily writes against social, political and sexual repression. Herbert Selby emerges as a surrealist of the streets in The Room and Last Exit to Brooklyn. Para. Hunter Thompson, in his famous novel Fear and Looting, Loothing in Las Vegas, was dismayed at the failure of the youth movement, which needed, quote, more kindness, unquote, stop. He exposed the craziness of American life in the 1960s. John Hawke's novel The Cannibal is set in the background of American life, but reaches back to World War I and, quote, forward to predictions of a third one to create a sense of cyclicity and inexorability of genocide and murder, unquote, stop. Para. John Barth's BRTH apostrophes, The End of the Road, The Floating Opera and Lost in the Fun House are full of wit, humor and satire. His Scott Weed Factor and Giles Goat Boy are historical epics in prose. Flannery O'Connor is a superb writer who espouses the cause of the child, the woman and the sick. Silence in her stories is more eloquent than speech. Josephine Handin writes about her achievement. Quote, Flannery O'Connor became more and more the pure poet of the misfit, the damaged daughter, the psychic cripple of all those who are martyred by silent fury and redeemed through violence, unquote, stop. Joyce Carol Oates in a novel, Them, T-H-E-M, brings to light the conflict between mothers and daughters, which may be termed generation gap. She is the exponent of the tradition of socialism in the 1970s. The poor in America have a divided soul. Her other novels are A Garden of Earthly Delights, Expensive People, Do With Me What You Will, Wonderful and Child World, stop. Doris Lessing, Elias Assange, is a feminist who realistically writes about, quote, the problems of being alive in terms of the problems of being a woman, unquote, stop. A woman always finds herself in traps set around her by mother lovers, and finally herself, stop. Her famous novels are Children of Violence, The Golden Notebook and Briefing a Descent, Descent into Hell. Para. Cynthia Buchanan in her novel Maiden, Maiden, quote, takes of America as a woman caught between the old romantic ideals and the new faith in sex, unquote, stop. Lois Gould, Gould, in such Good Friends, takes up female sexual anger as a subject. Her other novel, Run River, also deals with this theme. Para. Thomas Pynchon, Pynchon, is an outstanding novelist of modern in American fiction. He is very private man. He did not come to accept the National Book Award he won for Gravity's Rainbow and quietly accepted the O. Henry Prize for short fiction, the William Faulkner Foundation First Novel Award for V, and the Rosenthal Foundation Award for Fiction. He did not accept the Howells Medal for the most distinguished fiction produced in the preceding 5 years in 1975, instituted by the American Academy of Arts and Letters. His famous novel V, 1963, deals with, quote, people who know that love could not diminish suffering because it was love that produced half the anguish there was. Stop, page 420. He knew that what the world needed was not another Christ, but an end to the daily passion play, unquote, stop. His other novels are Sonnets, Orpheus and Gravity's Rainbow. He celebrates the devil whose mission is, quote, to promote death, unquote, stop. Josephine Hendin writes, Pynchon has but to gather the emotional, cultural and historical preoccupations of his generation with a brilliance and depth, ... unquote, para. P.G. Wodehouse, 1881 to 1975, who became a professional writer in 1903, is remembered for Enter Smith, P.S.M.I.T.H., 1909, Leaves It to Smith, P.S.M.I.T.H., 1923, Ulkridges, Ulkridges, 1924, Carry On Jeeves, Jeeves, 1925, Right Ho Jeeves, 1934, The Code of the Woosters, WWSTERS, 1938, Ring for Zines, ZEENES, 1953, and The Return of Jeeves, 1954, stop. He was untouched by the pressures of the 20th century. He was a humorist and craftsman par excellence. His famous character Jeeves has become a household name. Para. Isaac Asimov, the most outstanding science fiction writer of the 20th century, brought the detective and science fiction genre together and evolved the scientific detective who combines vast scientific knowledge with sharp ratio on cinative, C-I-N-A-T-I-V, ability of pose, Dupin. He created two imperishable scientists, detectives, Bailey, who resolves complicated murder mysteries in The Caves of Steel, 1976, and The Naked Sun, 1956, and Dr. Wendell with his collection of detective scientific stories entitled Asimov's Mysteries, 1976. His other works are Foundation, Foundation and Empire, Earth is Room Enough, The Stars Like Dust, The End of Eternity, Nightfall 1 and 2, 1, Robot, Arrobioti, The Rest of the Robots, Arrobioties, Nebula about stories and tells of the Black Widowers. Para. Peter Benchley, Benchley, is a great contemporary novelist who, in his famous novel Jaws, 1974, turned Sharp Attack into a national obsession. He was fascinated by the sea, which is a significant presence in his The Deep, 1976, The Island, 1979, and Beast, 1991. Para. Stephen King, the horror fiction writer, has based his latest book, Cell, C-E-L-L, on intrusion on privacy due to mobile phones, which are a great danger to modern civilization. It was published in 2005. His other works are Carrie, C-A-R-R-I-E, The Shining to Pet Cemetery, The Green Mile, Riding the Bullet and the Plant. Many of his novels have become horror films. Stop.